Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Over decades, the Berlin Wall had stood, dividing the people of East and West Germany who were separated by clashing political parties. Tensions flared, leading into the Cold War and the formation of the wall that separated Eastern communism from Western democracy and capitalism. Only starting in 1989, with the German Democratic Republic, relent to opening up the borders between the two sides. The fall of the Berlin Wall marked the end of the Soviet bloc and the Cold War. Democracy and capitalism had triumphed over their rival communist counterparts. Unfortunately, this victory also brought tragedy, as Eastern Europe struggled to define itself from Soviet control. On the night of August 13, 1961, tragedy fell over Berlin, splitting the capital. The Soviets wanted to show their power by building the wall, a symbol of freedom lost and independence quenched. The people did not stand by this, and many tried to escape by jumping over the wall, scaling it, or even driving a car through it. Why were so many people trying to leave? The German Democratic Republic Party, also known as the GDR, that controlled the eastern section of Germany, was the main cause of this epidemic. Following World War II, Russia was given territory in Germany, and the GDR came springing up to represent the USSR's ideals. The party was backed up by the Soviet Union and the secret police. Despite rebuilding, East Germany would watch their economy fall with the expansion of the GDR. As the years passed by, the Soviet Union grew weaker while the West grew richer. In addition, many of the young educated workers were fleeing, which added to the economic fall. Walter Albrecht, the leader of the East German Party, had realized this problem, and in May of 1952, the East German government shut down the open border between East and West Germany. Yet still, people continued to flee into West Germany. Finally, on the night of August 13, 1961, East Germany completed the wall, sealing themselves away completely from the Western world. People in Berlin woke up to find themselves in a separated capital. With their freedom and independence lost, the people would be trapped for decades to come. At first, their travel was limited, but the people on the East Side still had their free education, warm homes, and food on their plate. But at times, things got worse.
Nicht so streng, aber denen sind halt die Leute davon gelaufen auf gut Deutsch. Ne? Immer mehr sind geflüchtet oder sind in den Westen gegangen.
As the years passed, the state of the USSR diminished, leaving the people within their land starving. The economy crashed, but the power of the Berlin Wall only strengthened. Many in outrage and depression would petition to bring it down, but the wall would continue to stand firm, a symbol that would last for the coming decades. This was East Germany's final attempt in keeping their people contained. This was an act against humanity and a sin against the people. This was a tragedy that would forever be marked in history. One might not realize how much freedom that they have until it is stripped away from their possession, as the one inside East Berlin were experiencing. World leaders spoke out about the tragedy of the wall, including the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. In his speech on June 26, 1963, in West Berlin titled Ich bin ein Berliner, he stated,
"Freedom has many difficulties and democracy is not perfect, but we've never had to put up a wall to keep our people in, to prevent them from leaving us."
Continuing on, he tried to raise the spirits of the citizens of Berlin and the world when he said,
"All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin. And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner."
Another leader who spoke out against the tragedy was Willy Brandt, the mayor of Western Berlin. He was quite avid in his thoughts about the wall and the political views of the East, as he stated,
"The discipline of the Third Reich is toadyism and not freedom. Its anti-Semitism and its inflammatory nationalist propaganda are narrow-mindedness and not intellectual breadth. Fascism is an intellectual slavery."
The tragedy would continue for the citizens of East Berlin for nearly 30 years. But by 1989, the Cold War was beginning to thaw. In the days leading up to the declaration of the border opening, people were rallying against their government. With their main supporter Russia weak and refusing to support the government, the GDR was left at the mercy of the people. At a meeting, they were booed by millions from the crowd. In fear of the party dying, Gunter Schabowski, the country's spokesman, had slipped that they were planning to reopen the borders immediately. Afterwards, people in West Berlin rushed to the wall, hoping to get past. Overwhelmed by the crowd of people, the border guards let the people pass without passports. It was on that Friday, November 9th, where over 2 million crowded the streets, celebrated their freedom, the freedom that they had lost for the past 30 years. Not only was the wall being opened a physical triumph, but it was a symbolic one as well. The wall had stood as a symbol of tyranny and a constant struggle for freedom against the East German government. The wall had stood as a symbol of the Cold War that literally and figuratively divided and threatened the world. Now with the triumph of the wall opening, East Germany was able to start the process of rebuilding.
In Ostdeutschland, und da muss ich sagen, von der Gegend, Bauwerke und sowas war eigentlich Ostdeutschland oder Ostberlin schöner als der Westen. Wie heißt denn der? Zum Beispiel der Potsdamer Platz.
Yeah.
Das war früher an der Mauer.
Yeah.
Das war eine ganz runtergekommene Gegend, da war also auch im Westen nichts, weil da war einfach nichts. Und das war eins von der ersten, wo nachher praktisch mitten in Berlin war, weil ja die Mauer nicht mehr war, wo
Ja.
sie gerichtet haben. Da hat Daimler sein Büro gemacht und das ist noch so ähnlich wie ein bisschen ein Mall jetzt auch. Das haben sie schön gemacht. Dann haben sie die Museumsinsel alles renoviert. Das ist, glaube ich, auch Osten gewesen oder zumindest an der Grenze. Da kann man jetzt auch an der Spree mit dem Schiff rumfahren. Das ist ein ägyptisches Museum und dieses und jenes Einzige, was. Dann haben sie den Reichstag renoviert. War ja auch.
Western democracy and capitalism had triumphed over communism. Several months later, East and West Germany would reunite to become the country that it is today. This triumph was unfortunately short-lived, as tragedy again soon followed this massive celebration. Eastern Germany's initial euphoria of freedom had been quickly extinguished. They had expected their lives to immediately get better, but they didn't. With trade wars and emerging market crisis, Eastern Germany couldn't keep up. The economic collapse in the mid-1990s had left Eastern Germany now democratically elected with little leverage in the country's government. With the whole country now integrated, the people already in Western democratic part of the country had to pay higher taxes to support the people in the East. Despite their efforts to rebuild, within 3 years, 71% of the people in Eastern Germany had lost their jobs. By 1991, 1.3 million jobs were lost, and millions more were lost in the following years. Not only were people losing their jobs, but the cost of living was on the rise. With no money to support their families, many East Germans lost hope in the future. This was a major tragedy in the history of the wall, as the people who expected their lives to become better had instead faced poverty. Outside of Germany, the fall of the Berlin Wall also had a major impact. As the wall represented the end of the Soviet bloc, its fall was also responsible for the tragedy that happened afterwards. The Soviet Union was not prepared to support its smaller territories, so the Western countries took over. There was a peaceful democratic transition in Czechoslovakia, and a less peaceful one in Romania and Bulgaria. Even worse, however, was the country of Yugoslavia fell into collapse in 1991, sparking a series of war which included ethnic cleansing and genocide. In Russia, they had their first democratically elected president in 1998. They were not prepared for the new change in the government, which led to an economic crash, increasing crime and corruption. Countries in Africa that had ties to the Soviet Union fell into civil wars, and their lands turned into turmoil as well. Many of the problems that arose in the years following this tragedy. The fall of the Berlin Wall had also pushed several other countries to be more democratic in their government today. Despite this, the Western world's enemies had shifted from communists to a more secretive cluster of groups, ranging from terrorists and separatists to radical Islamists. When people think about the Berlin Wall, they remember how it fell and the impact it had on the world. They think about how it represented the suppression of freedom and the tyranny of the East German government. The fall of the Berlin Wall marked a triumph for freedom and Western democracy. However, tragedy followed in its aftermath. The opening of the wall may have been a bright light in the dark history of our past, but it had a share of devastation and tragedy along the way.